I didn't mean for the words to come out that way. But once they left my mouth, I watched something inside Daniel snap, like a fragile glass splintering into pieces. He stood there, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tightly I could almost hear his teeth grind. Then, without a word, without even glancing back, he walked out the front door. And just like that, my marriage ended with one sentence. The weight of silence. Daniel and I had been married for 12 years. We were the kind of couple people pointed to and said, they're solid. He was dependable, the type of man who always kept his promises. Steady, thoughtful, even-tempered. And maybe that was the problem. Dependability had started to feel like monotony. Routine wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. Every morning the same. His alarm at 6:15, coffee brewing, the sound of his shoes lacing before work. Evenings weren't much different. Dinner, television, bed. At first, I told myself this was stability. Safe. What every woman should want. But eventually, I started craving something else, something thrilling, reckless, alive. And that's when I met Eric. He was everything Daniel wasn't, spontaneous, unpredictable, fiery. He made me laugh in ways Daniel hadn't in years. What started as harmless flirting at the office grew into lunches, then into late nights I explained away with excuses Daniel never questioned. I told myself it wasn't serious, that I still loved my husband, that I could manage both lives. But the truth always finds a way to surface. The slip. It was a Thursday evening when it happened. Daniel came home early, unexpected. He walked into the kitchen while I was on the phone, my voice low, soft, intimate in ways I hadn't spoken to him in months. The call ended abruptly when I saw him standing there, his brow furrowed, eyes narrowing as though piecing together a puzzle. "Who is that?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with suspicion. I hesitated too long, and that silence said more than words ever could. "Just a friend," I finally murmured, but even I didn't believe the words. Something in his expression changed. His shoulders tensed, and though he didn't press further, the air between us grew thick, suffocating. That night, he barely touched his dinner. He didn't reach for my hand during the show we half-watched. And when we went to bed, he turned to his side, away from me, the space between us feeling like a chasm. The question. 2 days later, it came to a head. We were in the living room, a storm raging outside, rain pelting against the windows. Daniel stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed, while I sat on the couch, twisting the hem of my sweater. "I need to know the truth," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air, electric. My first instinct was to deny it, to protect him from the truth, to protect myself from the fallout. But his eyes, God, his eyes, searched mine with such intensity that lying felt impossible. "Yes," I whispered. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. He closed his eyes, inhaling sharply as though trying to absorb the blow without crumbling. "How long?" I swallowed hard. "A few months." The sentence that broke him. He paced the room like a caged animal, his hands raking through his hair. I could see him unraveling, piece by piece. Then he stopped, turned to me, and asked a question I wasn't prepared for. "Why him? What does he give you that I don't?" I should have said something gentle. I should have spared him, softened the truth. But my resentment, my craving for passion, spilled out before I could stop it. "He makes me feel alive," I said. The instant the words left my mouth, I wanted to snatch them back. But it was too late. I watched his face change, the devastation etching itself into every line, every feature. His lips parted slightly, as though I'd physically struck him. His hands dropped to his sides, his whole body rigid with disbelief. It was in that moment that I broke him. Without another word, Daniel turned. He walked to the door, his steps slow but purposeful. I thought he might stop, might slam the door, might shout. But he didn't. He simply opened it, stepped out into the storm, and left. And he didn't look back. The aftermath. I stood frozen in the living room, the echo of my words replaying in my head like a curse. "He makes me feel alive." Alive. As if Daniel hadn't been the one to hold me when my father died. As if he hadn't worked overtime to help us buy our first home. As if he hadn't been the man who memorized my coffee order, who kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work, who carried my mother's groceries without ever being asked. Alive. The word now tasted bitter on my tongue. Days passed. I called him, texted him, begged him to come home, to talk. He didn't answer. I drove past his office, even his brother's house, but he was nowhere. It was as though Daniel had erased himself from my world. And, in a way, I couldn't blame him. The letter. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, just his neat handwriting across the envelope. I tore it open, my hand shaking. Inside, his words were careful, deliberate. You wanted to feel alive. I wanted us to feel safe. I thought those two things could exist together, but maybe I was wrong. I can survive many things, anger, disappointment, even betrayal. But I can't survive knowing that I wasn't enough. Not for you. Not for us. That sentence broke something I don't know how to fix. So I'm walking away before I lose the rest of myself. Don't look for me, Daniel. Tears blurred the ink until his words became a smear of blue. I pressed the paper to my chest, but it couldn't fill the void he'd left. The regret. Eric called me that evening, his voice full of the same charm that once swept me away. But now his words felt hollow, meaningless. He wasn't the man who had built a life with me. He wasn't the man who remembered the exact way I liked my tea, or who held my hand under the hospital lights when I miscarried years ago. Daniel was. And I'd thrown him away for a spark that burned too quickly, leaving nothing but ash. I ended things with Eric that night. He didn't fight me on it, he never really cared about me beyond the thrill. The house felt empty without Daniel's presence. His absence lingered in every corner, in the half-full bottle of his cologne, in the indentation on his side of the bed. I broke my husband with one sentence. And now, every day, I live in the ruins of those words. The final sight. Months later, I saw him. It was at a coffee shop across town. He was sitting by the window, a book in his hand, a calmness about him I hadn't seen in years. Across from him sat a woman I didn't recognize, her laughter light, her smile easy. Daniel looked at her the way he used to look at me. Before everything. Before the betrayal. Before my words cut him to pieces. I froze, torn between rushing to him and disappearing into the crowd. But then he glanced up. Our eyes met for a brief, fleeting second. And just as he had that night, he looked away. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply turned back to the woman across from him, his lips curling into a small, genuine smile. And I knew, in that moment, that he was gone. Truly gone. I had broken my husband with one sentence. And there was no stitching back what I had shattered.